We created rules for a haunted house that shouldn't exist. Now, as adults, we found a house matching its description. Part 2, the first floor. My hand shook over my shut eyes as I waited, as the four of us waited, while Patrick operated the front door's metal knocker. 1, 2, 3 knocks. Just like the rules said. While we waited, I was hoping no one would come to the door. That we would all have a laugh there on the front porch as whoever was behind this house from our childhood imaginings made real would come forward at the get-go. That we wouldn't have to go inside not knowing what we would find. Maybe, I hoped, like a child making a wish with a penny at a shopping mall's fountain, it was some rich benefactor who'd built the house for us at Patrick's request. And had somehow made it look very old on the outside. You know, the good kind of surprise. Instead, I could hear the front door opening. My heart flipped and flopped. I thought I heard breathing, but I couldn't tell if that came from us or whoever had opened the door. 1 Mississippi, Greg was saying aloud. 2 Mississippi. His voice shook. While he was counting, I thought I heard something like slurred words coming from the doorway. Then it began to sound to me more like language in reverse, like when you play a movie or record backwards. 3 Mississippi. All right, Jennifer said, hilarity or fear quaking her voice as well. I'm now opening my eyes. I opened mine too. There was no one at the door. Patrick rushed in immediately. We followed. The lights were already on. A rough-looking chandelier that I vaguely recognized cast a pale yellow light over the foyer. Patrick's head was swiveling around near the entrance. He thrashed a nearby curtain, a potential hiding place. Whoa, Greg said, whoever it was moved quickly. Or maybe, Jennifer said, the door moved itself. Now don't start thinking I'm a believer. It could be some mechanism triggered by the knocker. Patrick, I said. You got some friends with deep pockets? I don't make many friends these days, he said. He was still looking about for whoever had opened the front door for us, checking the closet under the stairs. 3 of my only friends are with me now, if I can still count you as friends. Sure, Pat, Greg said, flipping through his sketchbook, producing a pencil from his pocket, and either sketching or writing some things down. Look at this place, I said. It's just like how we imagined it when we're kids. I mean, it's all coming back to me now. This is the foyer. Seems to be to scale. Or close enough, I guess. Those are the stairs that curve just like we drew them. Don't step foot on the stairs, guys, Patrick said. Here's that little bench I remember drawing in beneath the mirror, Jennifer said. She moved over to the right. And the mirror, its wooden frame is engraved with a bunch of snakes chasing their own tails. This was my idea. I'd forgotten about it, but, you remembered? How do you get something like this? Well, I said, if this house continues to be even somewhat remotely based on the floor plans and items we put in when we were kids, things are going to get kooky. Yeah, Greg said, no kidding. And it had been kids back then, not architects or house decorators, that had come up with this place. Kids obeying the kinds of whims and fancies that they had. The only reason we had even known about Victorian-style houses and their designs was from books we had rented from the library to help us along the way. Our primary goal had been to create a scary, dangerous house. That reminded me of something important. We made some traps, I said. Remember? At length the other 3 said they did. I can't remember all of them, Patrick said. Neither can I, Greg said. We'll help each other, I said. Together, Jennifer said, we can remember a lot more. I'm still amazed that none of went right back out the door or even talked about doing so. We hadn't started any of the puzzles yet. We hadn't risked our lives yet like the rules said we would by entering. But the threat was there and had begun to magnify as soon as that front door had opened and we'd gone inside. We should have been better prepared. I had no holy water, salt, or silver on me, not that I think it would have mattered, not that I or my 3 friends believed in that kind of stuff anymore. But maybe we wanted to believe in that stuff again. Guys, Patrick said. Cubby hole. It was there to the left of the front door, almost camouflaged with the chipped white paint of the walls. It was surprisingly large enough to accommodate quite a few things. 3 of us put our phones in the cubbyhole, Greg having left his in the car. Nobody has any fancy spirit detecting equipment, right? Greg said. No infrared thingamabobs or anything like that, right? If so, please deposit them in the cubbyhole now. I seem to have left my proton pack at home, Jennifer said, giving me a wink when I looked at her. So just cell phones, Greg said after we'd finished. Glad we came prepared, he joked. Heck, I didn't even think to bring a flashlight. I checked ahead of time, Patrick said. Electricity is running to this place. I didn't go inside until now, but I had an idea the lights might be operational. Who's paying the electricity bill, Pat? Greg said. Don't know. Wasn't able to find that out. Patrick was already moving beyond the foyer. We followed. We were all still joshing around at this point, well, except for Patrick, but you could tell our nerves were all on fire with fear. No entities yet to speak of. Unless they were invisible. I wasn't sure whether which would be scarier, being able to see them or not being able to see them. We moved about the first floor. The foyer passed by the stairs. Next was the parlor, an old-timey and foreign word to us when we're kids, but one that Jennifer had explained to us back then was like a living room for entertaining guests. It had a more formal air than a family's personal living room. So we had done our best to draw in fancy chairs and cabinets and lights in that room. And there they were. The furnishings were rough despite trying to be fancy. High-backed, plush chairs with faded gilding, the cushions falling apart. One large cabinet flared out at the top into a clown's visage, etched in wood. I looked to the right wall of the parlor, noticed the painting on the wall that was a hybrid of Mona Lisa and George Washington, slapdash together with a heavy dose of Salvador Dalí melting clock vibes, only this time it was the flesh on the face that appeared to be melting off the skull. Greg's doing. It looked good, almost professional. Had Greg been that good of an artist back then? The eyes were hollowed out, all the way into the wall it sat upon. It was the classic haunted house portrait with its eyes hollowed out so someone behind the wall could get a good look at you deal. If there's a technical term for that, I don't know what it is. But I watched the hollowed out eyes closely. Jennifer came up beside me suddenly, and I think I may have jumped. That's Greg for you, she said. We went beyond the parlor and into the dining room, passed into the kitchen, and at that point we were looping back around towards the living room that was connected by way of a hallway back to the foyer and stairs. There was a lot of creepy stuff scattered about. Blood-stained cups in an old china cabinet, dolls that had what were like medical fake human eyes, to replace an eye that had been lost, sitting on couches, dishes in the sink that seemed to be covered in bile and mysterious chunks and actually smelled, so bad we were gagging. I don't know about the others, but my biggest scare, at least until we got to the living room, was that nasty thing coming out of the cuckoo clock. Wish I wouldn't have forgotten about devising that when we were kids. Probably something Greg had cooked up in that sick little brain of his. It was in an alcove in the kitchen above a side table. It leapt out towards me from a crooked, broken little house with a clock on its front, a figurine of a man who was so old and disfigured it was unclear whether he was still alive. His formal but tattered coat flared out behind him in the place of wings. Instead of saying cuckoo, cuckoo, it said leave, leave, in a strange voice. It was the kind of voice that imitated a human's but was in no way human. By this point, we were all getting a little angry. You could tell in our postures and the way our voices began to sound when we made little observations. If one of us was behind all this, it was already too much. Already too far. Then we got to the living room, that last room before the foyer and stairs again. The family's personal space. Traditionally, at least by my understanding when it came to older houses, it was not the best place for guests. It was here, we knew, that the first puzzle was supposed to be. Curiously, we hadn't really tried to create the puzzles back then when we were kids, even though we were all intrigued by puzzles. I wondered if, even back then, we had hoped in a dark part of ourselves that someday we might encounter this house in the flesh. Maybe we didn't want to make the actual puzzles back then because we didn't want to know their solutions yet. I wish we had. I wish we knew all the answers before it really began. The living room furnishings were the most ordinary of the rooms we'd encountered. And yet, in the fireplace. The puzzle. That was the area we had designated for the first puzzle. I remember circling many times around that fireplace and jotting it in myself, first floor puzzle. It almost glowed. Probably it did glow. We drew closer to the fireplace. Instead of a fire in the open firebox, there were heaps of gold coins, amber topazes, green emeralds, red rubies, and ominous-looking jewelry. I noticed a pendant of a spiky winged owl or bat with twinkling eyes. What is? Jennifer said. Why is the treasure here? It should be upstairs. At the very end. In the attic. We don't know what the treasure in the attic is, I said. And we don't know what that is. There are blocks of stone missing from the fireplace mantel, Greg observed. Sure enough, there were. Going from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel, the first, second, third, 8th, and 13th block were missing, up to the point where the mantel ended and the rest of the masonry began. They were large blocks of rough-hewn stone, like for something constructed in medieval or pre-medieval times. We searched the room for potential clues to the puzzle. Middle. A mildewy chaise lounge with golden buttons and a battered couch and armchairs arranged in a loose circle. Middle. A side table with an ancient, ratty-looking earth globe sitting on top of it, but the globe was caved into the northeast, Alaska and much of the North Pole lost to a makeshift crater. There was a seashell beside the imperfect globe. Middle. An old desk that looked like it had been crafted in the 19th century sitting against the wall. Middle. On the desk was an empty, off-white envelope and a compass, not the kind of compass for telling which direction you were going in, but the tool with a metal point, hinges, and a pencil that people draw circles with. The drawers in the desk were empty. Middle. And the missing blocks in the fireplace mantel mentioned earlier, the first, second, third, 8th, and 13th from left to right, starting from the bottom of the mantel. Like the other furnishings and odds and ends, like everything else outside of what was in the fireplace where the puzzle would be, we had come up with these things as kids. While we're looking over what we thought must be clues, Greg suggested that maybe, just maybe, we had been unconsciously trying to create and solve a puzzle even back then. I do vaguely remember us having left some blocks out of the mantel. Bizarre, almost random little details for kids to come up with. Underneath the chaise lounge chair, Patrick found the blocks of stone that were missing from the mantel. "What do you think, folks?" Greg said. "Do they go back in the mantel?" "It can't be that easy," Jennifer said. About that time, things began to take a drastic turn. Up until then, it had just been the inanimate trappings of the haunted house in there with us. I'd almost forgotten that there might be someone or something else there too. The entities. I don't know exactly how to put this. It was like the air on the edges of the room began to blur or haze up. I could only imagine what was going through Jennifer, Greg, and Patrick's minds, but as for me, I was hoping it was some kind of smoke effect. There were shapes in the haze. Already I could tell they were bigger than us. And they moved strangely, in a different rhythm to our walking or shuffling, like there was a weird and elaborate jerk to the right or left between stepping, almost dance-like. Other than that, they had seemed to be clothed from head to foot in a fuzzy white material that seemed to have a hint of other colors to it. But I couldn't determine what the other colors were. As they moved towards us slowly from the edges of the room, I pointed at them and shouted, as if trying to shout over the smoke or haze that half obscured them. "Did we come up with them?" I shouted. "Did we ever plan out the entities themselves?" "I don't know," Patrick said, his voice firm but much lower than mine. I saw that he had his hand on something in his pocket. I made a mental note to myself that we should probably play what's in my pockets if we made it to the next floor. Jennifer rubbed the back of her head as if she'd been hit there. Greg was transfixed by the approaching figures, his mouth slack and his eyes glazed over. "We gotta do something," I said. "And quick." "Whatever we do," Patrick said. "We can't run. Remember the rules. They can run if we run." Solving the puzzle wasn't supposed to be timed. I yelled. I wasn't sure whether I was yelling at those in the haze coming towards us or my friends. It wasn't in the rules. "We changed the rules," Greg said. "We added some, but it's easy to forget. We took out some things too. The 7 we have. The finished product, there are some things that were cut." I cast my sights about the living room, between the clues we had if they were clues, my friends, and the entities approaching us. I was noticing more details about the entities, like how each seemed to be wearing a mask. They had to be masks, there was no way. Even at the slow rate they were moving, I judged they might be within reaching distance by the time a couple of minutes had passed. Were there 6? No, 7 of them? I ripped my focus from them. That was hard because my mind was struggling to fit them into the context of reality. My fight or flight was confused and berserk. I wanted this to all be a joke, but my instincts said threat. We were fumbling with blocks. "Which ones do we put in?" I said. My heart roared like the fire that, in an ordinary house, might have been in the firebox of the fireplace instead of a treasure. When I glanced at that treasure again, Patrick must have noticed because he said, "The treasure's a temptation." It was almost a chant. I didn't know if he was talking about the one in the attic or the one in the fireplace before us. But I knew one thing. They were coming.